Okay, let's go ahead and start. My name is Mr. Russo. This is
Ayana.
And right next to Ayana is
Sarah.
off camera we have Eric that's helping us out as well, and we're going to basically go through the Westward Expansion unit, talk about it, see if we have any questions. So if you would like, and you don't have this, if you're in my class, if you wouldn't mind getting this set of Cornell notes that go over the Westward Expansion unit. If you don't know where it is, you can always come ask me. And if you don't have these and you just want to take notes on a regular piece of paper, you would be able to do that as well. So let's go ahead and get started. This is for the Westward Expansion unit of the United States. I'm going to walk through, and if you guys have any questions, by all means, jump in. So here we go. The first question we're going to ask about the Westward Expansion unit is, why do I need to know about this? Who cares? What does this do for me? So the answer to that is, based on what I know and what I've thought about it, is the United States is one of the most powerful countries in the world, right? And the United States through history has done a lot of really good things, and we might not have been able to do it had we not been in the position where we are today. So had we been a weaker country, there's a chance that things in history, have you guys heard of like Hitler in World War II? Dun, 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 dun. Had we not had had the United States not had enough power, there's a chance that maybe we wouldn't have been able to help out as much as we did in World War II. So the fact that the United States was a world power for the most part has been a force for good. The bad part, though, is that the United States, to get the power, did some kind of not so good things to get it. So that's kind of why we're going over it.
What did they do?
That's what we're going to get to. Good question, Sarah. I'm right off the bat.
Mister, do you think I need new shoes?
No, I don't.
You're holding my camera.
Okay, anyways, define costs and benefits. So before we get anywhere, we got to very quickly talk about what are costs and benefits. Now, these were one of the vocab words. So does anybody remember what a cost is by chance?
How much you pay.
Yes. What is it? The price you pay? What were you going to say?
And then the benefits is like, it was working on your favor.
Yeah, so the costs usually are the tough things you got to do. The benefits are the things you get that are the good things.
Did
Now,
you write that?
Yes, if you want to write something next to where it says costs and benefits. So costs, we could say maybe like Ayana said, the price you pay. And benefits are, just like Sarah said, the good things you get. Now, the costs and benefits we're going to be looking at
Wait, what's benefits?
The good things you get because of the price you pay. So the costs and benefits we're going to be looking at is what were the costs of Westward Expansion, not just for the United States, but for the people involved, and what are the benefits? What are some of the good things the United States gained out of the Westward Expansion movement? All right, you guys ready to start? Here we go. Here is our first slide. Sometimes I have to click it like 10 times to get it to work. Isn't that great? Aha! It does it like every time. I don't know why. All right. Do you guys see this map on your notes?
Yes.
Do you see how it's the same as this map here? So if you look, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this, but...
No, mine's smaller.
What? It's a tiny bit smaller. I'm not going to lie. Your smaller map, what I would want you to get is that there's a line that goes through it, but hopefully what you understand is that these right here were the original 13 colonies, and this section right here was the territory the U.S. got after the American Revolution. So the United States in...
Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead, Sarah.
That land that you just showed,
Yeah,
that one looks like a dancing man
it does a little bit.
Oh my god.
with no arms.
A dancing man with no arms. There you go,
Oh
Sarah.
my
Thank you. So if you look, this land was the United States right around the year 1789. So right after the American Revolution, boom, the United States gets all this land, including the land that looks like a dancing man. What happens next in the year 1803 is that the president of the time, his name was Thomas Jefferson, he works out a deal to gain this land right here. And this land is known as the Louisiana Purchase. So, what are the big things you need to know about the Louisiana Purchase? Number one is that Jefferson got it in 1803, right? It doubles the size of the United States. The United States goes from being this big to now it's this big. He bought it from Napoleon Bonaparte, who was the leader of France, for $15 million.
Why do you even spell Napoleon? Like,
I know, look how it's spelled. N-O, I always think of like Napoleon Dynamite,
like
but
Right.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
yeah, well, he's the original.
He was the original, so
And
the
Bon- no,
oh, go ahead, sorry.
That's
What is
a weird last name.
Yeah, it is a little bit weird. Bonaparte. It's
Well,
French.
Like,
It's
when-
Francais.
Whenever
Bonaparte.
like, students will, like, have his last name.
We.
Oui, oui. Napoleon, come
That's
get
a
your
weird last-
breakfast. Napoleon Bonaparte.
Oui, oui.
Anyways, I know what you're thinking. Why did Napoleon Bonaparte want to sell this huge chunk of land when he could have kept that for France? The reason why is because he was trying to take over all of Europe, and it was working. And he wanted a little bit of extra money so he could make his army that much bigger so he could take it over. And he almost did. You'll learn in another class and another time why it didn't work out for him. But he used that money he got from Jefferson, the United States, to basically take over Europe. Yeah, Sarah.
Did he screw himself by settling this land?
He, not necessarily himself, he kind of benefited himself, but you got the right idea. He made it more difficult for France in the future. Because if France had this land today, the Louisiana Purchase land, they would be much more powerful country. So instead of France becoming this powerful country, instead the United States is the one that gets all the money and power from it.
Checks and balances.
Kind of. Okay. Any other questions? All very good questions. So the next
No.
thing that we're going to go over before we move on to our next slide is the other reason why this was a big deal is because the United States, when it was this big, there were a lot of goods and things that were created in the United States, but there was no way to get them from the inside of the country out. What the Louisiana Purchase did for the first time is it gave the United States this port called New Orleans. You guys, I'm sure, have heard of New Orleans, like the New Orleans Saints. New Orleans was a huge deal because there was a port there. So let's say that I had corn that I created when I was a farmer in this area of the country, and I wanted to quickly get it to New York City and maybe even Boston. So anyway, back to our example of the corn and the song New York. If I want to get my corn to New York City, this is huge because the Mississippi River ran through the Louisiana Purchase. I'd be able to put my corn onto a barge. It would sail down the Mississippi, and it would be able to go to a boat and sail all the way around up to New York. And believe it or not, this was way quicker and way cheaper. So having a port, a southern port at New Orleans, was a really big deal. It really helped a lot of businesses in the United States. So that big chunk of land that Thomas Jefferson gets, that he gets an amazing deal on, one of the first things he needs to know is what is in this land. And aside from the Native Americans that were living there, they actually had no idea. It could have been whatever. It could have been tigers, bears, monsters. They had no clue.
Tigers, lions, and bears.
No,
Oh
it's
my.
lions, tigers, and bears.
Lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my, whatever.
Okay.
Same concept.
Either way you slice it, the Lewis and Clark expedition gets put underway. Thomas Jefferson gets, I'm not sure which one of these is Lewis and Clark, but he gets both Lewis and Clark. They also find a Native American woman, Sacagawea, however you want to say it, and she helps them explore the whole territory, all the way, even they go past Louisiana Purchase all the way to Oregon. Yeah, Sarah.
Why did he only send 2 people?
He actually sent more than that. These are just the ones that usually get all the credit. It was a party of, I think, like 9 or 10 people. So it was a group. And
That's like a huge land.
yeah, they didn't get, all they did is saw like really general basic stuff. Like, we got bears, there's some good farmland. They didn't really get to explore a lot.
I
That's a
think
good
that
point.
guy is mean.
Jefferson or
Yeah, I'm
Lewis?
going to send you out on this like year.
Jefferson was actually a really good president. I did a report on him when
He sent like 10 people out to. I'm done.
Tell us what you think towards the end, but the bottom line is that they were able to, I know they have guns in this picture, but the main thing they had with them were just journals. And every time they cruised around and checked out a new part of land, they would write down what they
Do
saw.
they still exist?
Do they still exist?
Those journals?
Yeah, they do. They're in Washington, D.C. You can see them on
Sad
display.
face. You're like,
I thought you meant Lewis and Clark. Do they still exist? I was like, no, they died. Sad story.
Sad story how they
years
died.
ago.
Yeah.
Sad story how
The
they died.
journals,
Disease.
great point, Sarah. The journals still do exist, and when they got back, they showed Thomas Jefferson and a lot of people in Washington, D.C. exactly what they found. So they kind of laid the way for the United States starting to grow in this area. So
How long was that trip?
I definitely think it took like at least a year to 2 years. I'm not 100% sure.
So in
So-
10 people just performed.
Oh, okay, so what are we gonna? I see where you're at. What are you gonna write for the Lewis and Clark expedition? The whole point of the Lewis and Clark expedition was to just see what was in the new land. So see what was in the Louisiana Purchase, see what was in the new land, to explore the new territory, whatever you're thinking there. And Sacagawea, what you can put for her is she helped guide them. While you guys write that, I'll give an interesting little side story.
For the vocab,
Yeah,
when they did the Lewis and do you know what Adventure Time is?
I do not know what Adventure Time is. What is Adventure Time?
The show.
Oh,
Amazing show.
oh, I feel
That's
bad
my
for not knowing
favorite.
what that is.
I drew Finn.
Oh, okay. I don't know what that means, but
Oh, okay, yeah.
what does that have to do? Who's Finn? Is he?
Because he's very
They do like
He's
a
an
lot
explorer?
of exploring.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like, it's Adventure Time. Come on, grab your friends.
Thank you, Sarah, for making this relevant. Okay.
Well, you came.
An interesting story about Sacagawea was that she actually was a Native American from a tribe, and she was kidnapped from that tribe by another Native American tribe. And while they were on their journey, they met up with her original family. She was reunited with her family, and they like hooked the whole expedition up with like horses and food. So she really ended up helping them out when they were in a really bad spot where they had run out of supplies. They didn't really have a place to stay, and they ran into Sacagawea's home people that were like, "Oh, you got kidnapped. Welcome back. We'll give your friends food."
So that's when they had the Pilgrim Feast.
No, it was a little bit later, but along the same idea of Native Americans and settlers working together. Yeah. Sorry.
Did she hook up with him?
I could have swore she like had an actual baby with him, but I've
Yeah.
read a different thing that it was another guy that she had
No,
a kid
I
with.
am more than positive that it was like Lewis or something.
We got to look that up. Let's write that down on our things to
Okay.
find out. If we have time, maybe at the end we can Google it. Who was
Google.
she having kids with? All right. Anyways, let's turn the page. I think we're doing okay for time. We might have to speed up a tiny bit. Do you see on your notes? I didn't even put this in the presentation. It says War of 1812.
Yes.
I just figured I'd mention that very quickly. We're not going to spend a lot of time because it doesn't really have a whole lot to do with westward expansion. But it is a war, so it's worth mentioning. The U.S. goes to war with England again. I like to call it like the American Revolution Part 2, and they win again. Great Britain was like kidnapping U.S. sailors at sea, and so the United States is like, can you please? So American Revolution Part 2.
Who did they go to war with again?
England. So England was kidnapping these sailors, and while they were kidnapping the sailors, the United States was like, hey, can you please stop kidnapping our sailors? And England did not, so that was essentially what we went to war over. The United States wins, although England was able to invade Washington, D.C., burn the presidential palace to the ground, and they had to repaint it, and they repainted it white, and that's why it's called the White House.
Oh, that's neat.
But isn't it crazy?
What was the other color?
Why did
Yeah, I think it was just painted like brown originally.
all the brown?
So it gets burnt to the ground, everybody flees, but then they beat the British, so they kick them out of Washington, D.C., and when they come back to paint over all the black burn marks, they paint it white, and it becomes known as the White House.
I think Carly Jepsen's calling
All right, westward expansion. This also doesn't necessarily move west, but it is a big chunk of land that the United States gets. John Quincy Adams, who the Adams-Onis Treaty is named after, he was a president. He was the 5th president after Thomas Jefferson, but he thought it would be a good idea to try and secure Florida. So he made a deal. The group that owned Florida at the time was Spain. So he makes a deal with Spain. Can you see right here?
Yeah.
He basically says, if you give us this chunk, we will give you this chunk of the Louisiana Purchase, and we'll also set an official border. So that's what the Adams-Onis Treaty did. It set an official border with the Spanish and newly acquired American territory, and it also gave the United States France. All right, any questions about that?
So then write that down.
So Adams-Onis Treaty, you could say, gave U.S. Florida.
Gave U.S. Florida?
Yeah.
Florida.
And it also set the boundary.
Set
Boundary between, you don't have to add this, but between Spain and the United States.
I'm going to put set boundary.
Okay, next up, Manifest Destiny. All right,
Picture
so
freaks me out.
yeah, the picture is a little bit weird, and we'll talk about it, and hopefully you'll get what it means. But basically, there was a guy. He did not. This guy, his name is right here. But before we get to the painting, it's just worth mentioning that there was a gentleman by the name of O'Sullivan, and many.
That sounds like a sailor name.
Yeah, doesn't it? O'Sullivan. Many of the
Captain O'Sullivan.
many of the people that were living in the early United States were practicing Christians. And so as the United States started kind of slowly growing west, many of the people said, kind of, we're Christians and we're moving and we're showing these people this new religion of Christianity. We think we're doing the right thing. And this guy O'Sullivan took it a little bit further and he said, yeah, we're doing the right thing. It's technically, I feel like it's in our destiny to keep going all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And we're Christians and we're kind of doing the right thing. So technically, it's kind of like God's plan that we do this. So nowhere in any holy...
So he was trying to be Jesus.
He was trying to use like the religion of Christianity and Jesus
sounds
to
like he's trying
convince
to be
people to move west. And he put out an article saying this, and he called this new term manifest destiny, which another way to say it is he thought it was the United States' destiny to manifest that it goes all the way to all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Manifest is another word like make it happen. So he believed that the people in the United States should go all the way west. He wrote an article about it, and people started reading it and be like, yeah, you know what, we should go west. We're Christians, we're bringing all this technology and new ideas, and it's okay for us to go all the way west.
So he was like, the voices in my head are telling me. And then they were like...
And people started believing him.
So he tortured... No, like, there's a word for it. He, like, convinced...
He convinced people to start believing this idea that it was okay to head west no matter what gets in the way. And what we're going to see...
Wasn't.
By saying that there was voices in his head.
We're going to see that
Jesus
as
is telling me that it's okay. So
in so many words, he was able to convince a lot of Americans. Now, not all Americans believe this. A lot of Americans were like, wait a minute, there's a lot of Native Americans that live in this land. Spain, and eventually in 1821, Spain turns into Mexico, and a lot of people are like, wait a minute, we would have to like go through Mexico. I don't know about you, O'Sullivan. I don't know about this whole manifest destiny. What we'll see, though, is a majority of Americans believe in this, and they are willing to act on it and vote for people to do this. And so this idea of manifest destiny starts to happen. Around the same time, this guy, not Picasso, but his name was John Gast, created this picture that shows manifest destiny. Now, the way it shows it, I'll kind of walk you through it, is this is supposed to be the United States moving west, right? Now, do you see how it's all bright and light over here? And this woman here, she represents this movement, and she's portrayed almost like an angel from like the Christian religion, right? Versus over here, do you see how it's like dark and kind of hell and not good? Either way, it's bad,
so it's
right?
Like heaven and hell.
So they're portraying like Native Americans and even the buffalo, and this kind of, they're going to call it like the wilderness, is this kind of dark thing, not necessarily as bad as hell, but still this dark thing, and that this angel or this manifest destiny of the United States is bringing the light of Christianity and knowledge. And do you see how she's carrying the phone line? Or, I mean, it's like a telegraph wire line. She's supposed to be bringing technology,
I don't even see
bringing
that.
it. You got to kind of look closely. It's like right there. See it?
Okay.
So
Mine's black and gray. So
she's bringing this religion, and she's bringing technology. She's bringing settlers. The settlers look like they're like doing the right thing, moving. The railroads are right behind us. So this painting makes it look like manifest destiny is like a good thing, and that the thing that it's coming to is like the bad thing, and that it's like bringing civilization basically to this area. So this picture comes out, and a lot of people buy onto this idea of manifest destiny. Now, what does manifest destiny do? Well, for the United States, it ends up doing a lot of good things. It makes the United States a very powerful country, but we're going to run into the first group that it does really bad things for. Native Americans, right? So one of the first things that starts to happen is that in Congress in 1830, the guy on the $20 bill, Andrew Jackson, he basically says this tribe of Native Americans called the Cherokee Nation, he basically says they can no longer be here because they're calling themselves a confederacy, which is kind of like a country. There's not allowed to be a country inside the United States that's not the United States. So he passes or helps with the work of Congress to pass what's called the Indian Removal Act.
There's New Mexico.
And this happens in 1830. And as you can see in this map, see it on the left? It forces not just the Cherokee, it also forces the Chickasaw and the Seminole natives to move from their native lands to this new, see this area in purple? It forces them to move to this new area, which is basically going to be called a reservation. Now, what is a reservation? It was one of your keywords. A reservation, it was and is the land where they were forced to go and stay, in addition to what you did in hotels. Yes.
Is
So,
that like what happened with the Jews? Jewish.
this was a forced relocation, and what happened during World War II with the Jews is also a forced relocation. So there definitely are parallels there, or you could say it's very similar to what happened. Both groups were forced to go to a place they did not want to go to. They were forced to go there. And if you look at this, look how big the reservation is here. Do you see how much purple is over in this area? This was the year 1830 when this happened. This map on the right is a map of the United States today, and you can see where the reservations are located. So see all this land that Native Americans had for the reservation, even though they were forced to relocate, now it's reduced to, see a little tiny little bit? That is what it's reduced to today. So any Native Americans were forced to basically move here. Can you see how tiny that is?
That's really tiny.
Now, if you look today, just like you pointed out, New Mexico is right here in Arizona. New Mexico and Arizona are some of the biggest states with the largest Indian reservations or Native American reservations. But you can see that it's definitely not, if you were to look at this map during like the, I've got this right here. I might show the PowerPoint, maybe we can see it. But in our textbook, you can see the progression. So see in 1819, how all of this was Native American land. And then throughout 1894, how it basically has been greatly reduced. So this picture here is the same as this picture here.
Oh.
So, this was rough. The next slide that I'll show you. Trail of Tears is one of the things that come out of this. When Native Americans were forced to go to this area, as you can see, it was not a happy experience. It was really rough. It was really traumatic. So, the United States is practicing manifest destiny, right? They're moving west, and they're forcing anyone in their way kind of out, and that's kind of the cost of manifest destiny. Many Native Americans were relocated, so it was not a good thing for Native Americans.
So the U.S. was Nazis back in the day?
So the United States did, they weren't necessarily executing them, but they were forcing a group of people to move to a new place.
But they died.
And some of them died along the way. So do you remember how I said the United States did something that was not such a good thing to gain its power? That's exactly that's what I'm talking about. They did a not good thing, a really not good thing, right? But had they not done it, they might not have gotten power. But at the same time, they did a horrible thing to the Native Americans.
So it's
right?
kind of a good thing.
It's something we struggle with being Americans. In our past, our government, the people in America, did this bad thing, and had they not done it, we wouldn't be. Maybe the United States wouldn't even be a country anymore. We definitely would not be as powerful a country. So it's like we did this bad thing, but to become like a nation that does good things. I don't know how I feel about it. How do you feel about it? It's like I have mixed feelings. It's like it's messed up, but how we not? Maybe we wouldn't have been a powerful country. We wouldn't have spread democracy to the world. It's a tough one. I still grapple with it today.
I'm Indian, so it kind of bothers me.
Yeah. How do you feel, Sarah? Like having?
It's ridiculous.
Does it make you kind of angry? Like this was messed up?
Yeah. Even if we didn't have a strong country, you shouldn't have done that to
That's not how it, or maybe that's not how it should have gone down.
Human race.
All right.
That lady looks weird.
And you'll see people that feel all different ways, or people that are totally 100% your camp. Like they could have done this differently. This didn't have to go down like this.
If you put it in someone else, okay, the people that think it's okay, let's say they're I don't know, there's some type of race. Because I don't want to be
Okay, just a hypothetical,
yeah,
right?
okay. I'm pretty sure that it's their race or their ancestors.
They probably wouldn't be too excited
They'd be
about
like,
it either.
that's so messed up.
Yeah, there you go. And it is. I don't think there's any better way to get past it than it was this horrible, messed up thing that happened. And all of the people who went through this now are no longer on Earth, right? All the people from the year 1830 when this happened are dead, right? So it's not like you can go back and change it. We can go, unless we let the time. But either way you slice it, we can't necessarily change what happened in the past, but we can think about that as we move into the future. Okay, ready to move on? How are we doing on time? All right, I think we should be okay. Last messed up thing before we move on, just so you know, one of the techniques that the United States used, actually, yeah, this is pretty significantly horrible. Many Native American tribes, not all, but many, especially in the plains, relied on the buffalo for their whole sustenance, for their homes, for their food, for everything to sustain them. And so one of the techniques that the early Americans would do is they would just kill the buffalo in horrible numbers. And that's what I'm going to show you right here. If you look, see this year right here? There you go.
I don't like you massaging my calf muscles.
Do you guys see the year 1800?
Mm-hmm.
In the year 1800, they estimate that there was something like 65 million buffalo in the United States. That's a lot of buffalo, right?
I think buffalo's a funny word.
By the year 1870, though, the number is down to 1,000. So the buffalo go from 65 million down to 1,000. So essentially, almost eradicated. Now, in the year 2000, that is 70 years. So in 70 years, almost 65 million buffalo were killed. So in the year 2000, though, there's a lot of places that are bringing the buffalo back. Colorado is one of them. So the numbers are way more up. There's 250,000. It's growing. I think this number is probably closer to like 1 million today. So buffalo are like having a resurgence in modern times, and are on the rebound. But that was a tactic, and that's like what this scene is showing, how many buffalo there were. A lot of them were replaced. This is the buffalo right here. A lot of them replaced buffalo with cattle, but it was basically like a slaughter. They would kill as many as possible, and they would just kind of leave them, which is pretty messed up, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that like that one picture? There's like.
Yeah, this one right here. Or are you thinking of another one?
It was like, I don't know. I think it was just an image. Because there's a picture.
Oh yeah, on the side. Yeah, right there. That's the picture you have right there, right?
There was like, no, there was this picture on our vocab, and it like showed a person like with stacks of like something. And
Oh yeah, of like the skulls of buffalo.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's me.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's from.
What did buffaloes do to you?
All right, so here we go.
Peaceful creatures. They're very.
We've got 3 more topics. We got to kind of zoom through.
Like, why weren't they nice to buffalo? And like become their friends? Like,
Because
The reason-
they
were
need to like
food.
snuggle with
They
them.
were food.
They wanted to. The U.S.'s
To be your
purpose in
blanket.
killing all those buffalo was because they wanted to get rid of the source for Native Americans. So if the Native Americans had no food sources, they had nothing to eat.
Oh,
It
wait,
would
so
help.
the Native Americans didn't kill them?
No, good clarification. It was the U.S. settlers.
See,
The Native Americans.
They are so mean.
Native Americans did kill them, but it was on a much smaller scale.
So it was all the people from.
It was all the
England.
new American settlers, like the new Americans
They're
and some
evil.
new Europeans that were coming and killing them on a mass
So
scale.
no,
Evil.
no Spaniards or.
No, it was mostly like these new Americans.
Okay, good.
Okay, War for
Can we
Independence.
share our feelings at the end?
If we have time, Sarah, definitely if we have time. But if you look at this next section, let me see, make sure. Yes. 1836 Texas War for Independence. So, if you jump back to the year 1836, at this point, this is Mexico. And even though this is purple right here, technically all of this belonged to Mexico. What happens with the Texas War for Independence is a lot of Americans from the South want to move into Mexico, and they start doing that. And Mexico doesn't really care. They say, sure, you guys can settle this area. We don't have a whole lot of people settling it. We don't mind.
That's nice.
We'll tax you, so we'll collect some money from it. But yeah, come on in. So basically, you have a lot of Americans that are immigrating into Mexico, into the state of Texas, or Tejas, I think is what they called it back then.
Why is it illegal now?
We'll get to that at another day, not necessarily today. But you have Americans that are settling inside Texas. And it doesn't take long before you have way more Americans living in this part of Texas than there are Mexicans. And all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but over time, many of these Texans basically say, hey, you know what? We're all Texans, Americans living here for the most part. Let's just make this our own country. And that's exactly what they do. So they revolt. They say, hey, Mexico, we're going to take this and make it our own country. We're going to call it the Republic of Texas. The Mexican government sends their guy in charge, whose name was Santa Anna, or Santa Ana, however you want to say it, and
Santa
he
Ana.
comes in and crushes this movement in the Alamo. It was a famous battle called the Battle of the Alamo. The Battle of the Alamo, and all of the Americans are basically killed and kicked out. Does that make sense? So
That's
originally Mexico
interesting.
is slowly starting to get their land back. But then it doesn't take long before the Texans regroup and basically get another army. This time, this guy right here is named Sam Houston. They take control of it and fight Santa Anna again. This time they win. They take Santa Anna as a prisoner. That's him right here. And they force him, for his freedom, to give up this chunk of Mexico, and this chunk becomes the Republic of Texas, its own country. And
So-
eventually the United States takes this over.
So Houston was like Houston, Texas, named after Houston.
Sam
then?
Houston, exactly. Yes. All right, we're running low on time, so I'm going to zoom through this next part, right?
Okay, go.
Okay, the Oregon Territory. This was the next chunk of land that they gained. They basically work out a deal with England, and they get this chunk of land from England. Last but not least, dun, 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 is the Mexican-American War. Oh, okay. So, here's what happens in the Mexican-American War. Remember what went down with Texas? Well, what went down with Texas still doesn't sit well with Mexico. Santa Anna goes back because he's freed. He goes back to Mexico City and he regroups. However, do you see this mix between the green and the blue? Mexico and the United States start arguing over where is the true border. And because of that, the American president, his name was Polk. The people elected him because they believed in manifest destiny.
Polk?
Polk. Is that a weird name?
Who names these
Like
people?
pork?
That was
It
his last
reminds me
name.
of
Kind of like
pork.
pork. Polk.
Polk? What was his first
Poultry.
name?
Polk.
Please tell me it's a good first name, not like
Andrew.
No, it was
Andrew Polk. Or
like James Polk. I want to say James Polk. Let's look that up at the end if we have time. So anyway, James Polk, he gets elected president, and do you
Wait,
see
he
this
was
in
the
blue?
president?
He was a president.
Is he considered one?
A president?
Yeah.
Yes, he was for sure 100% a president.
Wasn't in Washington the first?
He was the
I will
first.
look up his weird name.
I think he was like, Polk was like the 20-something president, I'm guessing. Sarah's on it. She'll find the answer to it, I think. Anyways, do you see this area in blue? The United States and Polk and a lot of Americans that believe in manifest destiny, they say they believe that we should get this land. So what Polk does is he sends a bunch of troops into this area just kind of waiting for something to go down. Mexican troops also come in the area, and there's like a random incident where like there's gunshots fired, somebody's killed, and Polk declares war on Mexico.
Isn't that the American Revolution?
No, that was the Mexican-American War. And so Mexico and America go to war.
Okay.
Mexico is able to United States is able to beat Mexico, and
Stop.
what happens next
Okay.
Whatever.
is the war ends. And when the war ends, the United States basically creates a treaty called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, where they give up this land. The United States throws a little bit of money into it, like $10 million, and the United States gains all this land. And really, manifest destiny is complete.
Woohoo!
So the United States gains a huge chunk of land from Mexico. This helps the
Okay,
United
that's
States
fine.
become... Found him. What's his name? Was I wrong? James. I was right. James Polk.
James.
What number president was he?
Was it a big war?
It was a pretty big war. The United States ended by
He is
going
the
actually
11th.
into Mexico City. 11?
I-
Okay.
One,
That was way out.
two.
All right, last two topics. The United States, once it gets this land, there's a little bit of a dispute, and we have a railroad that runs through the south, and they want to go below the mountains in Arizona, so they also want to buy this land from Mexico.
He is
This is
the
called the
11th.
Gadsden's Purchase, quote, 11th president. And the United States just buys it from Mexico for $10 million. So now the United States can run its railroad right through there.
Cool.
California Gold Rush. This happens in 1849. Gold is discovered, and many people go to California. The population of California, like
Triple.
even more than triple, like times 10. It grows really largely. A lot of people wanted to try and strike it rich. Not very many people did. The people that did make money are the ones that made businesses, like the people selling the miners food. Levi and Strauss, the jean company.
Oh, really?
Those guys started their company by selling their new type of pants to
New
the
type.
miners.
Oh, snap.
What's so different?
Last but not least, dun, 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 dun. When the United States gains all of this land, it creates a railroad line that goes all the way through it. This is complete in Utah. It runs all the way from basically like New York City to California. This is where they met up. You can see everybody's cheersing like, we did it. What this did for the United States is it basically helped make trade cheaper, which helped businesses. We did it.
Woo!
Some questions to ponder. What were the costs and benefits for the U.S. from westward expansion? And was
Yeah,
America
born on my
justified in carrying out a policy of manifest destiny?
I share a birthday with him.
Do you really? What is it day?
August 3rd. He was
All
born
right.
in 1961.
Any last questions, team?
How much was 15 million?
15 million back
in the
then
day?
would be worth something like 250 million today. Does that make sense?
So that's a lot.
That's
Yeah.
that is a lot of money, right? 250 million. But do you know how much it would be worth if we sold the Louisiana Purchase
1
today?
trillion?
It would be like hundreds of trillions of dollars.
Has anyone
pay
ever
off the
been
debt?
like, yo?
That would for sure. That would. Our debt right now is 16 trillion. That would pay
16
off
trillion?
it, no problem.
What are we doing?
All right. Any other last questions? So here's a good question for us to think about. Do you think the United States was justified in carrying out a policy manifest destiny? Was it worth it? The bad things we did, like what happened to the Buffalo Native Americans, what happened with the Mexican-American War, was it okay since the United States got all that land and became a powerful country and does a lot of good things in the world today, like spread democracy? Was it worth it for all the bad stuff we did? That's just something to think about. All right. Any last questions or comments? Then we are done. With that,
That song makes me think of gorillas. Like,
Okay.
I don't know why, but whenever I hear it, I'm like, gorilla.
Gorillas, like the animal. The band.
The fruit. The fruit.
What fruit do you guys eat that is called gorillas?
Yes, the animal.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Thank you, sir. All right, this makes
You
much
don't
more
get
sense.
sarcastic.
I don't.
Ace lost last time.
Mm.
Is that your favorite team?
No, it's not. I don't even know why I said. Just kind of sad that they lost, I guess.
What's your favorite team?
The Broncos.
Oh.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, wait, what's your favorite
No, I
No,
like the
it's-
Broncos.
Huh?
Packers and Jets
No.
and Broncos.
I don't think I've ever been in a football conversation without
Patriots.
people making those sounds. Oh, you like the whatever team.
Yeah, for real. Oh, you like that team?
Yeah, that's what it does. All right, so back on track. Speaking of football, that was me being sarcastic because this isn't about football at all. Comes
You're horrible at it. I
the
was like,
Louisiana,
what is-
the Lewis
I was
and
like,
Clark
what is Lewis and Clark have
expedition.
to do with anything about football?